It was early July. I was quite pleased with my cunning. I bought one of those huge plastic storage tubs from the general store, filled it with water, stuck it in the back of the van, and waited for my feline quarry. A large, pug-faced tabby this time. After an hour of hiding in the cab, the cat climbed down from the roof where I'd found it and into the waiting reservoir. I raced to the back, slammed the van doors, donned leather gloves, and prepared for a hissing, clawing fight. But, surprisingly, the cat didn't struggle at all. It was fully submerged in the water, curled up on the bottom of the container like a rock. I picked it up, shoved it in the cage, dumped out the water, and drove. It wasn't until I was halfway to Wolfville that I noticed the smell. Once, my 9-year-old son dropped a fish stick in the back of the car and forgot about it. A humid summer week later, my car smelled just like that cat had. When we got there, the chubby tabby put up as much of a fight as it had in the van. I didn't hold it for long. Years of experience with scared animals taught me that less time spent with claws inches from my face, the better. But the short span of time the cat was in my hands was enough to make me seriously uncomfortable. It was heavy and somehow doughy. My hands sunk into its flesh like some silly putty, and it was cold. I left the cat in the quarantine cage in Kathy's office. We usually only used the cage for animals that were obviously ill, which the tabby was not, to be honest. But there was just something wrong with that cat. Like, it shouldn't be mixed with others of its species. I gave it bowls of kibble and water, then sat down at the desk to fill out an application for a grant. Kathy was gone for the weekend, visiting her sister in Bakersfield. Jacques was in the back, cleaning out some pony stall. I couldn't concentrate, not with that cat around here. I looked over my shoulder every other minute. Each time, I'd see the same thing. The flat-faced tabby, sitting in its water bowl, staring at me. It never blinked, it never moved. It didn't even appear to breathe. The rotting, fishy odor filled the room. Finally, I cracked. I double-checked the latch on the cat's cage, locked the front office door, and pretended to be busy feeding the dogs. I called the pet and asked if he could come by and take a look at the feline, but he said he couldn't be able for another week. The next morning, I found the office window wide open, the quarantine cage open, and the cat gone. I wasn't disappointed at all. Long after that, everyone started talking about little Charlie Henderson. Charlie was 12 and had been skateboarding alone shortly before midnight, in the parking lot by Lake Colette. The lake was still stump-covered and fenced off as usual, and the occupants of the nearest homes had long since packed in for the night. The way he told it, Charlie had been approached by a cat. He bent over her pet, and the cat danced away, leading him to a grove of trees behind the lake. He followed the cat, then suddenly he was attacked by a small army of cats. They jumped from the trees and emerged from the shadows, latching onto his clothing and limbs and dragging him towards a hole in the fence. If a lost car hadn't pulled into a parking lot and turned around, causing cats to scatter and giving him time to run away. Well, honestly, who knows what they'd done to him. No one believed him, of course. Everyone assumed he'd been attacked by maybe one feral cat and his imagination just had taken over or something. Because cats don't corner people and jump them. That takes organization and planning. Intelligence not possessed by house pets. And his story got really weird too. He claimed one of the cats had stretched itself, like silly putty, and grew an opposable thumb. Then, out of nowhere, Jane came back. It was a loud, cloudy afternoon. I was taking advantage of the slight cool down and deep clean of the dog kennel. Kathy was gone again, in Riverside watching her granddaughter play softball. I was busy scraping dried dog crap off the concrete when Jacques ran out to tell me there was a lady asking for me. I wiped off my hands and went inside, to find Jane Catorn staring at me through Kathy's living room. Jane had never been so fastidious about her appearance. But if I hadn't known her so well, I would have assumed the gaunt, trembling figure in the stained wife beater was a homeless woman. Her hair was a frizzy, matted mess of gray. She looked unwashed. Her arms and chest were stripped with lacerations of varying degrees of death, in various stages of healing. And her eyes, which had once seemed to serve as a window of a rational, calculating mind, now allowed a glimpse of a bloodshot insanity. "Jane," I said. "What? Are you okay?" She didn't smile. "Do you have any?" she asked. I frowned. Any what?" "Cats, Marlena," was the curt reply. "It's the cats. I need the cats. They've been wandering." I gave her what I hoped was a kind smile. "Okay, Jane, I could show you the cats, but Kathy said I'm not allowed to have any of them adopted without her around." To be honest, that was a lie, but I wasn't about to pass Jane custody of a pet rock, let alone a living, breathing creature. She was obviously not in the physical, emotional, or mental state to care for anything. Not even herself. I walked her out to the cat kennel. As expected, a small herd of dogs ran towards Jane to sniff her and beg for attention. Then, about 3 feet from her, the dogs stopped. They sniffed the air, whined, and loped off in all directions. Not a single one got any nearer. Jane looked over at the cat seriously, then sighed in disappointment. She shook her head, turned around, and paced back to Kathy's house. "You haven't caught any," she said. What are you talking about?" I asked. She glared, looking through me. She could cut through anyone's bullshit and see their soul. "You know what I mean, Marlena. My cats. Call me if you catch one. There's so many of them now, and they're getting bigger." With that, she walked right out the door. But before she did, she stopped and turned around. "And Marlena, watch the lake." I spent the rest of the day in a daze. I'd been wondering what the weird cats came from. They didn't belong to anyone in Juniper Valley, and it was hard to believe they'd all migrated from Palmdale. Jane took in homeless cats. Maybe they were hers. I didn't know why they would have left food, water, and shelter to wander for miles along an isolated road and into a neighborhood, but it was at least a possibility. That night, following a tangled motivation I couldn't put into words, I borrowed my father's car and drove off to a parking lot by Lake Colette. This is where Charlie Henderson had been attacked. I pulled right up to the fence, turned off my car, let my eyes adjust to the darkness. I obeyed Jane, and I watched the lake. I hadn't sat for 10 minutes before I saw movement. A black shape creeping out of the shadows and approaching the water's edge. More movement against a clump of trees to my right. Cautiously, quietly, I opened the car door and stepped out. I shut the door gently and tiptoed towards the fence. A large, black cat waded in the dirty lake. Its paws were inundated. It just kept on going. A subtle creak. I came closer, until I was grasping the metal links of the fence, and I felt the quiver under my fingers. I looked to my right, and then I saw them. 2 more huge cats, the biggest cats I've ever seen. Cats climbing down the fence like monkeys, head first, completely vertical. One, then the other, just jumped gracefully to the ground and stepped on the feeble light bleeding from the 2 steel lights. One was yellow, the other was a tabby. The first cat was almost completely submerged. With the lightest gurgle, it ducked under the scum-covered water line and into the black hole, the toothed tar pit. the light wasn't good at all. It looked as though second and third cats had flattened when they hit the ground or something, like Play-Doh thrown at a wall. And there was something just so strange about how they moved. They jiggled, their legs bent in the wrong way or something. I don't know, it may have just been the shady lighting. Where was the black cat though? It couldn't still be underwater. Ripples in the lake, small islands on yellow scum shifting in gentle waves. I didn't feel a breeze at all. There was something else in there. A cadence of nerves was triggered in my brain, forgotten but immediately recognizable like a song. I was scared of Lake Colette, scared just like I had been as a child, when the black water had seemed from my bedroom window like a depthless well. I ran back to the car, I did a donut in the parking lot, and sped home. The next morning was hot and bright, and under a cloudless sky, it all seemed ridiculous. I was letting the Charlie Henderson rumors get to me. I walked past Lake Colette on my way to Willfell. I went right up to the fence. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary this time. No cats in sight. A light breeze ruffled the water. I breathed in. I gagged. It smelled like rotting fish mixed with a McDonald's dumpster. It smelled like the pug-faced tabby I'd caught before. Cats don't like water, and cats don't swim. I'd spent nearly half a decade surrounded by cats, and the cats I'd been chasing around the yards and spying on the night before weren't cats. They couldn't have been cats. They couldn't have been. That smell. The way the tabby I caught had felt it and held it, bloated and putty-like. Cold. Those cats didn't purr or meow. They didn't eat, they didn't poop. Their intelligence. And that stare. That fucking stare. Those glassy, corpse-like eyes that seemed to take in everything and nothing. And then there's Jane. Her cats, she said. They've been wandering. They're getting bigger? Maybe she was going nuts. Living out alone within the wilds. A mile away from her nearest human neighbor. The dogs wouldn't come near her. Her own cats had been attacking her, apparently. How else would you explain the scratches all over? Yet, still, she was so desperate to have them back. I had to talk to Jane again. Kathy was still gone, and it was Jock's day off, so I planned on heading to Jane's Lillian Dirt Road as soon as I fed the animals. But a couple from Palmdale called unexpectedly, asking if they could come over by with their daughter to pick out a pet. By the time they select a corgi mix and made arrangements to have the dog neutered, it was after 5. It was fine. The light was still out. I locked up, grabbed my keys into the van, and made my way into the hills. My teenage bravado waned as I traveled farther and farther away from Juniper Valley. There's no defined town line, but when you reach the intersection of Skylark and Oak Tree Lane, you're essentially watching civilization shrink in your rearview mirror. I'd forgotten just how far away Shane's shack was from anything, and just how desolate and lonely the mountain road became. I didn't see a single other car the entire time. But finally, I came to the rusted blue mailbox with Jane's numbers on the side. I turned on the dirt road, and the van jerked violently as I climbed up the hill. When I reached the apex, I saw Jane's shack. Carefully, foot on the brake, I made my way down the valley. It didn't look like Jane was home at all. There was no light coming from the windows. I pulled up closer, into the driveway, past the house, to the carport in the back. The back door was wide open, and Jane's El Camino was there. The cats weren't, though. No cats lounging in the piles by the stairs. No prowling around the yard. I'd never been within a quarter of a mile of house, day or night, rain or shine, without seeing at least a few cats. I pulled beside Jane's car, climbed out of the van, strolled into the backyard. Jane's empty property looked lovely in the approaching dusk. Tall grass surrounding by gentle golden hills, spindly naked trees reaching for the heavens, majestic firs meeting fluffy white clouds like an Old West movie backdrop. She must have been hiding in the house. She must have crept up behind me or something, because I don't remember feeling the blow. I woke up, lying in cool, moist dirt. I was looking at water. Lake Colette? No. I saw nothing but hills and foliage in the distance. Where the fuck was I? I sat up. My head spun. I felt blood in my hair. I was sitting on the bank of a small pond. The water was greenish and thick with algae, covered in thick yellow scum. I took a deep breath and lurched. The smell. That smell! Rotting fish, rotting flesh. Fast food dumpsters stronger than I ever smelled it before. The water moved. Something was emerging in a few feet in front of me, swimming to shore. A black cat, paddling with uncomfortable, almost human strokes. I scrambled backwards, away from the approaching creature. It reached land. It pulled itself onto the bank and I stood up. Anyone who grew up watching Looney Tunes knows what a cat in theory looks like standing on 2 feet. This was nothing like that. The black cat's weight shifted. Its belly bulged, its lower legs swelled. It became shorter and fatter. The effect was the same as squeezing a stress ball. Instead of a creature with skeleton and tendons and muscles, I was being approached by a thing with the consistency of jelly wearing a furry suit. I screamed. I stumbled to my feet. Then I felt icy fingers curl around my neck. I struggled and instinctively horse-kicked my unseen attacker. The hand loosened and I whirled around. I was face to face with Jane Torrance herself. But it wasn't Jane at all. Her face was round and flat, boneless in fact. The wrinkles under her eyes had smoothed themselves out, and her nose bulged like a mushroom. And her eyes. The maniacal glint was gone from her eyes. So was the consciousness. So was the recognition. So was the vitality. Her pupils were so dilated, her irises were no longer visible at all. And what had been white was now completely red. Her eyes didn't move once. They were those of a corpse. A wobbling arm extended, and I was falling backwards, back towards the pond, towards the demented, anthropomorphic cat. I turned my body and caught myself as I slid, my left arm plunging into the murky water. A cold weight on my shoulder knocking me backwards. Then the cat, the thing, was sitting on my chest. It held out a paw, then stepped on one foreleg with the other. Its paw bulged, then reshaped itself. Its toes grew fatter, skin stretching, a small nub popped out from one of the sides. An opposable thumb, like putty in a rubber glove or something like that. Then something else in water grabbed my hand, something soft and cold and rubber-like, slimy but very, very strong. It pulled me. It was pulling me into the water, then something else jerked at my hair. Jane stood over me, smiling. She bent down, hands outstretched. Pudgy, bloated hands, attached to rope-like arms that jiggled and curled and changed shape. What happened next was a blur. I remember clawing, kicking, screaming at the top of my lungs. And then I was running, stumbling, lungs burning, stinging, aching, cursing the spongy, weeded ground that gave under my feet. I pushed through dry shrub after dry shrub and jumped over tree branches, praying I was going in the direction that would lead me to some sort of humanity, and that the crinkling of grass behind me was only my imagination. Then I was on top of a hill, looking down at Jane's shack. And then I was in Jane's yard. I saw the van and lunged toward it. I threw myself in the driver's seat, silently thanking the spirit or guardian angel that distracted me, so I left the keys in the ignition. I slammed the door, looked up, out the windshield, and into the red-black empty eyes of that thing that had been Jane. It was smiling. She'd always reserved a special smile for me. That was it. I turned the key and I gunned it. The van jerked violently. I slammed on the brakes, kicking up dirt like smoke. I felt a sticky moisture against my cheeks. I took a breath and barely managed to pull and open the door before I projectile vomited. Even thinking about that acidic, rotting seafood stench induces a nauseous tickle in the back of my throat. I crushed Jane under the front of my right tire. I'd popped her. God must have been smiling down on me that night, because the van still ran. I drove it straight into the police station, not anywhere else. In the parking lot, I surveyed the damage. The front bumper was dented, and the headlight was out. There was no blood. The mangled metal was splattered with glossy, opaque white goo. I was almost completely honest with the sleepy-eyed desk cop. I said that Jane tried to drown me in the hills behind her home, chased me into the van, and then when I ran her over, but left out the part where her body had taken the properties of a pasta and silly putty. The cop asked sarcastically if I'd been doing any drugs, but radioed a card to the site. Over the next week, I was questioned multiple times by police. Their questions became increasingly bizarre, to the point where they were asking about toxic chemicals and lights in the sky. Seriously, and whether I was or had ever been involved with a heavy metal band and or witch cult or something. I was chastised for driving down a lonely back road alone to approach a crazy woman, but I was never charged with any kind of crime. The cops were very cagey, but they'd found something. By the next morning, Oak Tree Lane was blocked off by county sheriffs, and the inhabitants of the hills had been roughly evacuated with no explanation at all. Then came more sheriffs, then the unmarked cars, then the tall, black, barbed wire fence around Lake Colette. Jane's death was reported as a freak accident. I tried to forget. I tried so hard to forget. I holed up in my room, watching happy movies on VHS until my mom came to me back to Van Nuys. I went back to school. I threw myself into studying and applying for college. When I needed to, I snuck my mom's sleeping pills. Eventually, however, curiosity overwhelmed my fear. I wanted some sort of answers, so I elected to spend the following summer, my last before college, in Juniper Valley with my father. Wilfell was no more. Kathy had left the animals with larger no-kill shelter in Acton, retired and moved to Riverside. There was a large for sale sign in front of once been her home, and it had been a dry winter. The chain-link fence, broken bent, still surrounded Lake Colette, but the lake was little more than a puddle. I flirted my way into a job waiting tables at a bar restaurant. I spent my nights serving burgers to bored townies, trying to strike up conversations about strange events of the previous summer. The shadowy agents defense that crazy cat lady. I was offered nothing but rumors, speculation, and good old-fashioned lies. Finally, I met a man named Aaron. He was in his 20s, chubby and socially awkward, to be honest. He worked as a counselor at a camp for disabled children. He talked about Dungeons and Dragons and a little bit too much. And his uncle was a local cop. It was a slow night. I shot the shit with Aaron for a while. When I asked him he'd heard about the crazy cat lady who died last year, he played it off like a tabloid headline. What crazy? Oh, that lady. He laughed nervously. Yeah, I heard about her. They found her body in Drainson Pond in the hills. And all the cats were missing. That's about it, really. But I'd noticed his eyes widened and his hands trembled. I guess I got lucky. Aaron's cop uncle apparently had a weakness for Jack Daniels and a tendency to ignore police confidentiality when drunk. And that weakness must have been genetic because a sloppy, giggly hour later, Aaron was singing like a canary. Apparently, the night Jane had tried to kill me, 2 cops had been dispatched to her home off Oak Tree Lane, expecting to find an empty bottle of Everclear and a discarded bag of shrooms. Instead, they found what had been Jane Catorn's. Pieces of her were scattered across the ground like debris. They radioed for backup, and a small posse spent the remainder of the night on a scavenger hunt for vital organs. They found skin, plenty of it. The piece that once covered the back was folded up like a torn white tank top. Her bones and organs seemed strangely melted, as though pulled from a vat of acid, or digested or something. It was like one officer had said. Jane had been skinned from the inside, then filled with acidic goo like a water balloon. Everything was coated in a white translucent jelly substance. The officers had taken a sample to be tested, but by the next morning, it had evaporated into a powdery white stain. The big guns were called in, sheriffs, agents from multiple government divisions. He couldn't say who exactly. The local cops had been pushed out of the investigation by that point. He heard that upon searching Jane's property, they found an axe, multiple firearms, boxes of ammo, and 10 cat skins buried 1.5 feet deep in the backyard. Mostly with their heads detached, and all coated in that familiar white powder. They scoured the hills behind Jane's property, and they found the pond. That small sag pond that, according to land surveying reports, had not existed at all before the earthquake and the rains of the previous winter. They drained it. At the bottom, they found 24 more cat skins. All their insides were all gone, yet the skins were unmarred. At no point had they been cut apart or sewn together. Again, it appeared as if something had eaten or dissolved all of the blood, bones, and vital organs. Except for her teeth and the eyeballs. The eyeballs were left intact to stare hauntingly into oblivion. After this discovery, they dragged Lake Colette as well. Aaron didn't know what they'd found there. The lake was thoroughly searched, and even after government agents left, the citizens of Juniper Valley were urged to stay away. It's been nearly 20 years. I'm a veterinarian now, a divorcee, a mother. I've done some digging, spent hours and corners of the internet where I've seen things I can't unsee. Made some new friends, but I still don't have the answers I want. I don't know what changed Jane's cats that summer. Were they infected? Usurped? Possessed? I don't know. I think it was something in that water. Hyper-intelligent, blob-like things that lay dormant for years, brought to the surface by the earthquake, revivified by water, able to invade the bodies of other creatures. Jane had allowed her cats to wander the hills. The cats must have found the pond, and they leaned in to take a drink. And then maybe those blob-like things drowned them first, got inside them via mouth or anus or something, and digested their unfortunate victims from inside out. Then, they wore the skins like wetsuits. To exit the water, perhaps, maybe their bodies were weak against the air and sunlight. To look more like prey. Or to look for replacements, skin and eyes decompose eventually. But as they consumed cat after cat, they grew too big to stay in the sag pond. They needed a bigger body of fresh water to make their home. Lake Colette. They grew too big to fit inside a cat's skin. They needed clothes in larger size. They needed humans. Little Charlie Henderson. And Jane. Jane figured it out before anyone. Jane, who could cut through bullshit and see through a naked soul, realized some of her cats no longer had one. So she chased them down. She killed all she could. God knows how many there were. The 10 she killed, how many more? I don't know. But they got her. It found me, knocked me out, dragged me to a pond's edge, and I was going to be next outfit. Its next meal. But, to be honest, this is all conjecture. My opinion. All those years ago, I told Aaron, the chubby camp counselor, everything. He listened, eyes widening, but never doubting. The next morning, he and I took his car down Oak Tree Lane, to the rustling blue mailbox. And finally, the abandoned shack where I'd passed so many teenage summer days. We hiked a mile into the hills, carrying 2 shovels and my father's rifle. We found a hole that had once been a sag pond, now a weeded ditch. And we got to work. It was hard work. It was really dirty work. It took a few trips, but by the end of August, we had leveled the land and completely filled the hole with dirt. I don't know what was down there. But if there's more, they're not getting out now.